Hi everyone, yasas que Carlos Tirsate to another episode of Dimitra's Dishes. Today we're going to be making pear and cardamom scones that are going to be so light and flaky and delicious that everyone is going to love them. And I'm going to go over lots of tips and tricks and common mistakes that people make so that your scones are better than any scones that you get from a fancy tea house. Let's get started. You're going to want to make sure that all of your ingredients are ready to go. The cream, the butter, and the eggs have to be really cold, straight out of the refrigerator. In a mixing bowl, I'm going to add 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, a tablespoon of baking powder, and then 1.5 teaspoons of already ground cardamom. I usually have this in my pantry because it takes a lot of work to grind up fresh cardamom. But if you don't have the powder, you can just open up a bunch of cardamom pods and just grind them up using a mortar and pestle. You'll need much less, maybe 3/4 teaspoon, because fresh cardamom pods have much stronger flavor. And if you don't like cardamom, you can just leave it out and add lemon zest instead. So that's in there. And I'm also going to add a little pinch of salt. And I'm going to set that aside. Now I have 1.5 sticks of unsalted butter. I'm just going to dice them up and try to handle the butter as little as possible so you don't warm it up and it doesn't start to melt. Dice it up into small pieces like I have here and add it into the flour. And then in a little bowl or a little pitcher, you can add 1/2 cup of heavy whipping cream with 2 eggs and a teaspoon of pure vanilla extract, and go ahead and whisk that together using a whisk or a fork. And now we're going to get the pears ready. You want everything, like I said, to be ready to go. I have 2 pears here. I'm just going to peel them carefully. I'm going to cut them in half and I'm going to remove the seeds and any hard parts. And I'm just going to dice them up into small bite-sized pieces like this. Now we're ready to put everything all together. So the mixer, you're going to want to start it on low and let it mix until the butter starts to break up a little bit. You don't want it to get completely mixed into the flour where it looks like a dough, because then you're going to get hard scones. They're not going to be flaky. That's really the main secret in this. You want there to be little bits of butter throughout the dough, just like when you make biscuits. It's the same concept. So next we're going to add the wet ingredients, which is the cream and the eggs. And again, we're going to mix everything up very briefly until it's mostly combined. There's still going to be flour at the bottom, but don't worry about it. It's going to come together at the end. At this point, we're going to add the pears and mix those in. Again, just a little bit. You don't want to mash them up in there. Take the mixture out. Now we're going to transfer the dough to a clean work surface or a cutting board. You don't have to dust it with flour just yet. You still have to combine the dough a little bit more, because you'll see that at the bottom of the bowl there's going to be just like dry flour and little bits of dough. Just gently combine that all together to form a round disc. And I like to make my scones really nice and thick. The thinner you make them, the drier they're going to be. I like them to be thick like biscuits, so about 1 inch thick, just like I have here. You can do that with your hand. You honestly don't even need a rolling pin for this. Flatten it out with your hand, make it into a circle, and then I'm going to use this dough scraper that I used earlier so I don't dirty anything else. And I'm just going to cut this into 8 equal pieces, little triangles like a pizza. I'm going to transfer them to a baking tray that's lined with parchment paper, leaving some room in between them because they are going to puff up in the oven. I'm just going to use some heavy whipping cream to brush on the top of these. I used to use an egg wash, but I find it gives it a little bit of a plasticky texture, and I don't really like the flavor that egg leaves on the top, so I stopped doing that and I just go with heavy cream. Sometimes I leave the heavy cream out too and I just sprinkle them with some sugar. But I'll brush the tops with some heavy whipping cream, and then I'll sprinkle them with a little bit of sugar, and they're going to go in the freezer for about 15 or 20 minutes while my oven preheats. You want the oven to preheat to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and it is important to freeze them for a little bit so that way they hold their shape. They're going to spread a little bit, and I love making homemade desserts because they're not supposed to look like they came out of a factory anyway. They're a little more rustic looking and way more delicious. Once they're chilled in the freezer, you can transfer them to freezer-safe bags or freezer-safe containers, and they will keep fresh in the freezer for about 2 months, and then you can take them out and just bake them straight from the freezer frozen until they're nice and golden. But you do need to chill them for those first 15 minutes so that way they come out perfect that way. So they're going to bake on the center rack for about 20 to 25 minutes or until they're slightly golden on top. Take care not to overbake these, and also The thing is, when you're following instructions when it comes to baking time, do not go by the time. You have to go by how they look because every oven bakes differently and some ovens bake much faster, some a little bit slower. Keep an eye on them. The scones in the center most of the time are going to be a little less pale than the ones around the edges. That's just usually how ovens work. I don't like to cook these on the convection setting. If your oven does have a fan, cook it without the convection. They're going to come out better and less dry, but they just look beautiful. The house smells amazing. While these are cooling, I'm going to make a little glaze to put on top of them. If you don't want a glaze or an icing, you can sprinkle the tops with some confectioner sugar and they're ready to serve. But I'm going to add 1 cup of confectioner sugar to a bowl with the zest of a lemon, not the whole zest, just a little bit. I don't want these to be lemony. You can use lemon or orange, it's up to you. A little splash of vanilla extract and enough milk just to whisk this all up and get it to a pourable consistency. The more milk you put, the thinner the glaze is going to be, so you still want it to be nice and thick so that way you can see it on the scones, not too thin. Whisk it all up and set it aside. And once the scones are at room temperature, you can just drizzle the glaze on top or the icing on top and then serve them with some hot coffee. If you're not a huge fan of cardamom, you can leave it out. Sometimes you can't find cardamom. I like to buy it already ground. And when you buy it already ground, it's not as potent as when you grind it up with a mortar and pestle from fresh. I'll leave it up to you, but you can leave it out and instead you can substitute some orange zest or some lemon zest, and they both go so well with the pears. Almond also goes really nice with this. So if you want to add a little almond extract instead of the cardamom, you could do that. And I'll make sure to list all of those options on the blog post where everything will be written down. You can print out the recipe over there on the website, dimitrasdishes.com. Time for the taste test though, they smell so good. And when I open them up, you can see just how flaky and light they are. The pear is perfectly cooked in there. Gosh, they smell so good. Oh my goodness. Perfect. Not too sweet, light and flaky. You can taste the cardamom in there. It really brightens it up and adds some freshness. It adds a little bit of a peppery freshness. So good. I think you guys are going to absolutely love this one. If you want to amplify the flavor even more, you can roast the pears before you add them in here, and I will put the instructions on how to do that on the blog post. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I'll see you all next time. Gracias.